Hello, everyone. Today, we're going to talk about a subject that, at first glance, seems self-evident, a subject that touches on our most intimate relationship with ourselves, on our feeling of being conscious beings, capable of choosing, capable of deciding, free will. And yet, what if I told you that this feeling is an illusion? What if I told you that the freedom we hold so dear is nothing but a mirage, a side effect of our ignorance? This is precisely what Spinoza, the 17th century philosopher, dared to claim. And this claim, as brutal as it may sound, overturns everything: our morality, our conception of responsibility, and even our very way of thinking about ourselves as human beings. Because deep down, what do we really believe when we say, "I am free"? We believe that we decide our actions, that we could have acted otherwise, that we are the masters of our own will. But for Spinoza, this belief rests on a fundamental illusion. We think we are free because we are ignorant of the causes that determine us. We believe we act on our own, while in truth we are being acted upon by an infinite chain of causes that pass through us, go beyond us, and of which we perceive only a fragment. Spinoza writes, "Men believe themselves to be free because they are conscious of their actions and ignorant of the causes that determine them." That's the whole point. We are aware of acting, but unaware of the deep reasons that make us act. We see the surface, not the root. We feel the movement, but not the force that provokes it. So, to understand Spinoza, we must accept a descent, a plunge into the very structure of reality. We must renounce, for a moment, our pride, that comforting idea that we are the captains of our own existence. We must let ourselves be guided where Spinoza's reason leads, toward necessity. For him, everything that exists is necessary. Nothing could have been otherwise. Everything, every event, every thought unfolds from an infinite chain of causes that proceeds from the very nature of God, or rather, from nature itself. We are therefore not exceptions in the order of the world. We are not souls floating above determinism. We are in the world, as the waves are in the sea. We are modes of substance, singular expressions of the infinite power of nature. And our sense of freedom, however sincere, is only a byproduct of that power expressing itself through us. It's a dizzying thought, almost unbearable at first. For it seems to take everything away: responsibility, merit, fault, even the very possibility of choice. And yet, for Spinoza, this is not a negation of freedom, but a radical redefinition. Because if everything is determined, then understanding that determinism is already a form of liberation. If we cannot escape necessity, we can at least understand it. And in that understanding, a new kind of freedom is born. Spinoza doesn't tell us, "You are not free." He tells us, "You think you are free, but you are not yet." Because true freedom is not the ability to choose arbitrarily. It is the ability to understand why you choose. It is grasping the causes that move you, so that you are no longer their unconscious slave. So, throughout this journey, we'll try to understand how this idea, seemingly hopeless at first, can actually become a source of power, peace, and even joy. Because if free will is an illusion, freedom itself, according to Spinoza, is a conquest of intelligence, of lucidity, of reason. To understand why free will is an illusion, we must first understand how Spinoza conceives of reality. For in his philosophy, everything begins with a simple yet absolute idea. There is only one reality, one substance, one cause of all that exists. And this cause, Spinoza calls God, or, more precisely, Deus sive natura, God, that is to say, nature. This God is not a being outside the world, not a creator who decided everything out of whim. He is not an artisan who shaped reality as one would build a house. No, for Spinoza, God is the very being of the world, the single substance of which everything that exists is but an expression, a mode, a way of being. There is not God in the world. There is God as the world. God is the infinite totality of which everything is a necessary effect. And that changes everything. For if everything flows from the nature of God, then nothing can be otherwise than it is. What we call chance is merely the effect of a cause we do not perceive. What we call choice is only the moment when one cause overpowers another. The world is not a chaos of random events. It is an infinite web of causes and effects, woven into absolute necessity. Imagine a vast ocean. Each wave seems free, unique, unpredictable. It rises, breaks, and disappears. But if you look closer, you realize that the wave did not choose to rise, nor to swell, nor to fall. It is the result of a set of forces: gravity, wind, pressure, the moon. It is necessitated by the system of which it is a part. And so, for Spinoza, we are those waves. We believe ourselves free only because we cannot perceive the entire ocean. Thus, everything that exists unfolds from an internal logic, rigorous, mathematical. Nothing is possible in any other way than it is. What we call the possible is merely a word we use to mask our ignorance of real causes. If we knew all causes, we would see that everything is necessary. Every event, every thought, every gesture, every emotion arises from this infinite pattern. And it is here that our illusion is born. We see our desires arise within us. We feel them as powerful, spontaneous, immediate, and we say, "I wanted this." But Spinoza replies, "You felt the desire, but you did not see the cause of that desire. You believe you will, but you are willed. You believe you choose, but you are chosen by the forces that inhabit you. You believe you decide, but you are merely the site through which an infinite chain of causes expresses itself." So, should we despair? Should we resign ourselves to being nothing more than a cog in the machine? No, for here lies the genius of Spinoza. To accept necessity is not to submit, it is to understand. And to understand is already to be free. Necessity is not a prison, it is a structure. It is what makes the world intelligible, coherent, stable. If everything were pure contingency, if things appeared without cause, the world would be absolute chaos, utterly incomprehensible. Necessity, on the contrary, is what grounds the order of reality, what allows reason to find its place within it. Thus, instead of revolting against necessity, Spinoza invites us to contemplate it, to understand it, to recognize it, not as a fatality, but as harmony, as coherence. Everything is as it must be, not by whim, but by nature. And it is by attuning ourselves to this nature that we begin to glimpse another form of freedom, a freedom not against necessity, but within it. We will see, as we go further, how this understanding completely overturns our relationship to ourselves. For once we stop believing that we decide everything, we begin to see what determines us. And that is where true power is born, the power to know oneself. Spinoza tells us something simple, yet of striking clarity. It is not because we decide that we desire. It is because we desire that we believe we decide. In other words, our will is not the cause of our desires, but their effect. And it is precisely here that the illusion of free will takes root. We confuse being conscious of our desires with being their masters. Look, you want something. You believe you have chosen to want it. But if you look a little deeper, you'll see that your desire imposed itself upon you. It rose within you like a tide, without your choosing it. You can later tell yourself that you decided it, that your will is its source. But in truth, that desire was born from causes you know almost nothing about. Your upbringing, your temperament, your history, your environment, your impulses. You feel the movement, but you do not see the mechanism that produces it. And that is what Spinoza wants us to understand. We are not the authors of our desires, but the places where they appear. The self, consciousness, are not sovereign centers. They are surfaces, interfaces through which deeper forces express themselves. Our illusion arises from the fact that we are conscious of our actions, but unconscious of the causes of our desires. And because we feel the power of desire within us, we interpret it as a power of decision. We say, "I willed." But Spinoza replies, "You felt your willing, not the cause that made you will." Here lies a radical shift, for it means that the self is not an origin, but a consequence. What we call our freedom is merely the partial awareness of a chain of causes of which we are a part. We believe ourselves to be the engine, but we are only the manifestation of a larger movement. So, should we conclude that we are nothing? That everything is predetermined? No, for Spinoza never says that we are passive. He says that we are determined, but determined to act according to the nature that is ours. Desire, for him, is not a weakness. It is the very expression of our essence. Every being, says Spinoza, strives to persevere in its being. This striving he calls Conatus. And this Conatus is the root of all desire. We do not desire because we lack something, as Schopenhauer will later claim. We desire because we are full of power, because our essence naturally tends to affirm itself, to expand, to endure. And here everything is reversed. The problem is not desire. The problem is our ignorance of the causes of desire. When we ignore where our desire comes from, we believe ourselves free, but we are slaves. When we understand what determines us, we cease to be dominated by illusion. And this understanding does not destroy desire, it liberates it. To be free, for Spinoza, is not to be undetermined. It is to be the cause of oneself insofar as one understands the causes that determine one. And this is where Spinoza's rationalism becomes an ethics. For the more I understand the causes, the more active I become. The clearer I am, the less I am the plaything of external forces. In other words, to understand is to conquer. But as long as I do not understand, as long as I believe that my desires arise spontaneously from me, I remain subject to causes I do not know. I believe myself free, but I am the slave of my passions. I believe I will, but I am willed. I believe I choose, but I am chosen. And this is the tragedy of the ordinary man. He imagines himself free when he is not. And it is precisely this illusion that prevents him from ever becoming so. For Spinoza, passion is not merely a fleeting emotion or a disturbance of the mind. It is a sign that we do not understand the causes that affect us and determine our desires, thoughts, and reactions. When we feel fear, anger, jealousy, or envy, we believe we are acting freely, whereas in reality, we are merely reacting to forces that pass through us and that we do not control. Passion, then, is a manifestation of our ignorance. We interpret our affects as if we were their authors, while they are the product of a complex chain of causes of which we have only partial awareness. It is this illusion that makes us believe we are free, while we remain prisoners of our emotions and desires. Yet man can free himself from this servitude. Freedom begins when we start to understand these causes. When we grasp why we desire, why we react in a certain way, why our thoughts take their form, we cease to be passive objects in the course of events. We become active. Action, for Spinoza, is precisely this capacity to produce an effect with full awareness of the causes that determine us. To understand is to liberate oneself. Fear becomes prudence, anger becomes energy, desire becomes perseverance. Every passion can be transformed into power when we apprehend its roots and underlying causes. This transformation has implications that extend beyond the individual sphere. It changes our relationship to the world, to others, and to ourselves. Understanding the causes of our effects means realizing that we are never isolated. Every desire, every emotion is part of a complex network of interactions with the world, with others, and with our own body and mind. We then understand that what we call chance or fate is merely a reflection of our ignorance. The more we comprehend these causes, the less we are swept away, and the more we become the authors of our lives, capable of turning necessity into an ally and latent power into conscious acts. Active joy, the direct consequence of this transformation, is not a simple, passing pleasure. It is the very expression of our power to live fully, with clarity and coherence. It arises from lucidity, knowledge, and awareness of the causes that determine us. It transforms our relationship with the world and with ourselves. Every desire, every emotion, every thought becomes a vector of power rather than an instrument of servitude. Understanding passions is to reconcile oneself with nature, to recognize that nothing is hostile to us and that everything participates in our essence. Moreover, this approach illuminates how we interact with others. When we understand our passions and those of others, we cease to judge superficially. We see that the actions of others, like our own, are determined by causes we can learn to know. This lucidity fosters compassion, empathy, and an ethics of relation based on understanding rather than raw emotion or impulsive reaction. Thus, freedom according to Spinoza does not consist in ignoring necessity or believing oneself master of all, but in embracing necessity with lucidity and transforming every passion into a conscious force. Servitude arises from ignorance. Freedom arises from knowledge. The clearer we see, the less we suffer, not by numbing ourselves, but by fully assuming reality as it is. Life then becomes an art of lucid living, where every desire, every effect, every thought is understood, embraced, and transformed into the power to be. Philosophy ceases to be an abstract system and becomes a concrete guide, enabling us to navigate the complexity of the world and our own nature. It is in this transformation of ignorance into knowledge, of passivity into action, that true freedom is born, opening the path to a fully conscious, joyful, and powerful existence. When the awareness of causes begins to take shape, passivity gradually gives way to activity. Fear, anger, envy, or sadness, which once passed through us like lightning, become opportunities for power when we understand what generates them. Fear is no longer paralysis, but prudence. Anger is no longer destruction, but channeled energy. Desire ceases to be a mere impulse and becomes perseverance in affirming our being. Every effect, when illuminated by knowledge, transforms into an instrument for living according to our nature, for expressing our essence with clarity and strength. This transformation is not superficial. It touches the core of who we are and how we interact with the world. Understanding our passions is reconciling with them, but also with the nature that flows through and exceeds us. Active joy arises from this transformation. It is not a fleeting pleasure nor dependent on external events. It is the very manifestation of the power to be. The more we understand, the more capable we become of acting according to our essence, and the less we are subjected to external forces. Lucidity turns ignorance into power and obstacles into opportunities for strength and clarity. Even adverse events, setbacks, and losses can be integrated into our power when we comprehend their causes and incorporate them into the movement of our conscious action. What once seemed limiting becomes an opportunity to live more fully, to strengthen our power of being, and to affirm our existence with intensity. This dynamic also illuminates our relationships with others. Understanding that the actions of others are determined by causes as complex and often invisible as those that affect us allows us to move beyond superficial judgment and raw emotion. Compassion and empathy arise from this lucidity. We perceive that each person acts according to their nature and their effort to persevere in being, and we begin to interact with greater fairness, less conflict, and more harmony. Knowledge of causes transforms not only our inner life, but also our way of inhabiting the world and coexisting with others. In this light, freedom according to Spinoza ceases to be an illusion. It does not consist in pretending not to be determined or in believing that we choose outside the causes that pass through us. It consists in understanding these causes and incorporating them into our action, transforming what seemed passive into conscious power. The clearer we see, the more actively we act, and the more every desire, every emotion, every thought becomes a vector of power. Life, thus understood and lived, is no longer a succession of endured events, but a lucid flow where necessity and freedom harmonize, where our passions become instruments of power, and where each moment can be lived with intensity, clarity, and true joy. It is in this continuity that the true strength of Spinoza's ethics is expressed. Life is not simply endured or suffered. It is understood, transformed, lived. We cease to be mere receptacles of external forces and become actors in our existence. Active joy is not a luxury or a reward. It is the very indicator of genuine freedom, the measure of the power to be, the expression of our alignment with ourselves and with the entirety of nature. Once we begin to transform our passions into conscious actions, a new dimension opens, the art of living according to knowledge. Spinoza does not offer us merely an abstract philosophy. He shows how each being can become the master of their life by understanding the nature of what flows through them. To act with awareness is to recognize that we are never separate from the causes and forces that shape our existence. Yet this understanding allows us to appropriate these forces and direct them according to our essence. What we once perceived as constraints then reveal themselves as levers, instruments of power, if we know how to understand and use them. Reason becomes the instrument through which we transform necessity into freedom. It allows us to discern what depends on us and what does not to turn away from what is beyond our control, but to integrate every element into a network of conscious action. Knowledge of oneself and of the causes of our affects makes us capable of anticipating, modulating our reactions, and choosing our actions within a broader framework than the immediacy of the moment. Thus, the power to act does not consist in arbitrary domination over the world, but in conscious harmony with it. This self-mastery and lucidity have an immediate effect on our relationships with others. Understanding that the actions of others are also determined by invisible causes frees us from reacting with hostility or frustration. We develop an ethics of relation based on understanding and cooperation. Compassion and empathy are not abstract or moralistic feelings. They are expressions of the power to act, the capacity to integrate the nature and existence of others into our own conscious action. By understanding, we cease to be passive. By understanding, we become capable of creating a world where our interactions are fairer, more harmonious, and more powerful. Yet this freedom and power are not static. They require constant effort, reflection, and knowledge. Every new experience, every event, every emotion is an opportunity to understand more and to act with greater lucidity. The Conatus, the effort to persevere in being, then becomes the engine of a fully lived life. We no longer desire merely to fill a lack or satisfy an impulse. We desire because our essence naturally tends to assert itself and expand, and every act becomes a conscious manifestation of this power. Thus, life according to Spinoza is not a succession of endured events or uncontrolled passions, but a harmonious flow in which knowledge, conscious action, and the power to be are combined. Active joy becomes the measure of our freedom, the proof that we have understood the causes of our desires and know how to transform them into power. This ethics of knowledge and conscious action is not a distant ideal. It is accessible to any individual who accepts to look lucidly at what flows through them, to understand it, and to transform their passions into instruments of life. Ultimately, Spinoza teaches us that freedom is not the absence of determination, but the ability to become a cause unto oneself by understanding the causes that determine us. The more we understand, the more we act. The more we act with awareness, the more we experience active joy. And the more we experience this joy, the more our existence rises to the level of real, lucid, and fully human power. Philosophy then ceases to be abstract reflection and becomes a concrete guide for living, for transforming our passions, for harmonizing our essence with the world, and for expressing the power of being that lies at the heart of every existence. And now everything converges. After understanding the nature of the passions, their origin, and their potential transformation, after grasping the role of reason, knowledge, and conscious action, we arrive at the synthesis of Spinoza's ethics. True freedom is inseparable from knowledge and the power to be. It is not measured by the ability to choose at will, but by the capacity to understand what determines us and to transform that understanding into action. Every desire, every emotion, every thought becomes a vector of power, and the active joy that results is the tangible sign of our genuine freedom. We then realize that we are never isolated. Our affects, our actions, our thoughts are embedded in an immense network of causes and relations. To understand these causes is to reconcile with oneself, with others, and with the world. It is to see that freedom does not arise from the illusion that we are masters of everything, but from the lucidity that allows us to integrate the forces flowing through us into our conscious action. Life then ceases to be endured and becomes lived with intensity, clarity, and harmony. The Conatus, this effort to persevere in being, is no longer a mere natural mechanism. It becomes the foundation of our power and freedom. Every act, every movement of mind or body, every decision made with knowledge and lucidity contributes to this affirmation of self. We no longer desire blindly, act passively, or endure our emotions as chains. We understand them, direct them, and transform them into power. It is this active mastery that constitutes the very essence of joyful and free life. But Spinoza's philosophy is not limited to the individual dimension. It also shapes our way of coexisting. Understanding the causes and the nature of passions transforms our relationships with others. It allows us to perceive their actions with lucidity, to develop compassion and empathy, and to create relationships based on knowledge rather than impulsive reaction. Freedom thus becomes both a personal art and a social art. Understanding, acting, and living fully, while integrating others into this lucid and harmonious movement. Thus, human life, in its most accomplished form according to Spinoza, is a constant balance between the knowledge of causes, the transformation of passions into power, and the active expression of our essence. Active joy bears witness to this harmony. It is neither fleeting nor dependent on the world. It is the expression of our accord with ourselves and with nature. It is proof that we have ceased to endure and that we know how to act, understand, and live. Finally, the conclusion presents itself with clarity. The illusion of free will is only a starting point, a necessary deception to make us aware of our ignorance. True freedom does not consist in believing that we choose without causes, but in understanding and integrating these causes into our lives, transforming knowledge into action and action into joy. The power to be then becomes the guiding thread of existence. We are no longer merely desire and reaction. We are conscious actors, capable of living with intensity, lucidity, and authentic happiness. This is the triumph of Spinoza's ethics, an art of living where understanding, action, and active joy unite to produce a life fully free and truly human.